Shim Eun-seok starts work at the juvenile court, and her strict approach to juvenile delinquents immediately causes tension among her colleagues. She is known as a person who does not tolerate any leniency towards juveniles who have committed serious offenses. This is immediately clear in the first court case where the defendant is a juvenile who is accused of causing the death of a young child by his actions. The trial is causing a great public outcry. The case has shocked not only the victim's family but also society at large, sparking a storm of debate about whether the juvenile justice system in South Korea is effective enough. At the center of it all is Shim Eun-seok, who not only has to deliver a fair verdict, but also get to the bottom of the system's deeper problems. Her approach to justice stands in stark contrast to the views of her colleague, Judge Cha Tae-ju, who leans more toward rehabilitation and giving second chances to juvenile offenders. In the course of the investigation, grim details come to light. The accused teenager was raised in difficult circumstances. His family faced financial hardship and emotional neglect. These details of the case make Shim Eun-seok think that social circumstances may have played a role in the teenager's behavior, but she remains adamant. To her, the defendant's actions are too serious to be justified by difficult life circumstances. Despite her cold-bloodedness, however, Shim Eun-seok begins to experience inner torment. Her strict view of justice is not always understood among her colleagues or even within herself. As the trial progresses, it becomes clear to the viewer that she has personal reasons for holding such harsh views on juvenile punishment. These events relate to her past pain, which begins to surface. Over the course of the case, Sim is faced with a difficult choice. Should she maintain a harsh line of punishment for juvenile offenders or still consider mitigating circumstances? A boy from a family that failed to provide him with a proper upbringing becomes the epitome of the issues that haunt the judge. However, she cannot allow her personal feelings to influence her sentencing, especially in a case of such public importance. Her decision on the case causes mixed reactions among her colleagues and the public alike. Shim Eun-seok shows her willingness to go all the way in her fight for justice, but the decision leaves a deep mark on both her reputation and her inner state. This case becomes the first serious test of her principles and beliefs. The first case is not just a trial, it is a moment when the judge is faced with the question of how profound changes are needed in the juvenile justice system. This episode shows that Shim Eun-seok is not just a tough judge, but a person who tries to find a balance between justice and personal morality, even though it may seem impossible at times. After the shocking discovery of the body Baek Seon-woo tried to hide, the investigation continues and Shim Eun-seok is faced with even more difficult circumstances. The case, which has been highly publicized in the community, intensifies the discussion about how far the juvenile justice system can go in its leniency toward juvenile delinquents. Each new fact in the case raises questions that require in-depth analysis. Shim Eun-seok is certain of one thing: this case requires special attention to detail, because it is not only about punishment but also about justice, which must prevail despite the age of the accused. The teenager at the center of the high-profile case remains silent. In interrogations, Baek Seon-woo does not reveal a shred of remorse. He refuses to communicate with both the court and his mother, creating further tension. Judge Shim remains convinced that his actions were not just a youthful mistake, but a deliberate attempt to cover up the traces of the crime. Her harsh approach to the case is raising more and more questions from her colleagues and the public, who are increasingly questioning whether such a harsh sentence can be applied to a teenager when his behavior could have been influenced by his social environment. At the same time, Judge Cha Tae-ju continues to insist that Baek Seon-woo deserves the opportunity for rehabilitation. He is convinced that the teenager was not left to his own devices for no reason. His family and the social environment in which he lived played a huge role in shaping his character and behavior. For Cha Tae-ju, Baek Seon-woo is not a villain, but a victim of a system that failed to intervene in his life in time to provide the help he needed. He cites numerous cases where juveniles who have committed offenses have found a path to reform through support and attention. As the investigation continues, more and more disturbing details about Baek Seon-woo's life come to light. The trial reveals a picture of his childhood, where unavailable parents, poverty and emotional pressure became part of his daily life. His mother, Baek Do-hyun, reveals that over the years she tried to cope with life's hardships, but was never able to provide her son with proper nurturing and care. Her constant absence from home, emotional detachment, and inability to find contact with her son have left the teenager in a hopeless situation. Baek Do-hyun insists that her son never meant to hurt anyone and that his actions are the result of the pressures he lived under. Shim Eun-seok scrutinizes all the facts. Her job is not only to reach a verdict but also to understand how similar cases can be prevented in the future. She continues her interrogations, trying to uncover the whole truth about the boy's life and his relationship with his mother. Her cold and professional approach, however, increasingly causes her internal conflict. On the one hand, she is convinced that the crime must be punished, but on the other hand, she realizes that Baek Seon-woo may have been the victim of circumstances beyond his control. At the same time, the investigation begins to involve other aspects of the social system. In the course of the case, Sim discovers that Baek Seon-woo has come to the attention of social services on several occasions, but none of their interventions have been successful. The child protection system, as it turns out, failed to recognize the danger signals in his behavior in time. The impact of ineffective social support on the teenager's fate becomes one of the key issues in this case. Sim realizes that punishments alone are not enough to solve such problems. The system must rethink its approaches to working with dysfunctional families. Baek Seon-woo's mother is getting special attention from the court. Shim asks her tough questions about why she didn't seek help earlier when her son was already showing signs of instability. Baek Do-hyun makes excuses, saying that she couldn't handle the pressure and didn't know where to turn. However, the judge doesn't accept such excuses. It's obvious to Sim that the mother didn't take enough care of her son, which led to such tragic consequences. Sim sees this case not only as a trial of one teenager's actions, but also as a mirror of the problems of the entire social system. In parallel with the court's investigation, the relationship between Sim and her colleague Chu Taiju continues to escalate. Cha Taiju advocates for the teenager's rehabilitation, convinced that punishment will only exacerbate his trauma. He cites examples of other cases where minors have been able to return to normal life after receiving support from the government and professionals. For him, Baek Seon-woo is not a criminal but a teenager in need of help and protection. He is convinced that the court should play a role not only as a punitive body but also as a restorative justice institution that helps young people find a path to reform. Meanwhile, Sim cannot ignore her inner conflicts. She becomes increasingly immersed in the idea that her every move has consequences not only for the accused, but also for the entire justice system. Her personal experiences begin to surface. She may have faced similar situations in the past, which shaped her tough approach to justice. These moments in her past remain a mystery to the viewer, but they make it clear that Sim is not just a cold judge. Behind her toughness is a pain she hides. Amidst this conflict, the judge continues to deal with Baek Seon-woo's case, trying to come to a decision that will be fair not only to the victims, but also to the teenager herself. Shim's final decision, after much deliberation and analyzing all the details of the case, is the result of her internal struggle. She realizes that punishment alone is not enough to fix the system and that measures are needed to prevent such tragedies. Baek Seon-woo receives the punishment, but Sim also emphasizes the need for psychological help and support for him. The decision resonates with both colleagues and the public. It becomes a symbol that the juvenile justice system needs to change to be fairer and more effective. However, Sim remains true to her principles no matter what the circumstances. Taking responsibility for one's actions should lead to the outcome she seeks. The ruling symbolizes the struggle between the need for punishment and the realization that the system requires revision. Sim emphasizes that rehabilitation is possible, but only in conjunction with accepting responsibility for one's actions. She realizes that despite her best efforts, it is not only Baek Seon-woo himself who is subject to change, but also the environment that led him down the path of crime in the first place. Her main task now is to ensure that tragedies like this do not happen again, and that the judicial system is able to work more effectively to prevent such incidents through social reforms and support. The closing moment of the episode symbolizes the beginning of a new chapter for Shim Eun-seok. She realizes that her role in the court is not only to punish criminals, but also to help correct the social problems that such incidents can cause. This episode was a milestone in her development as a judge who is willing to reconsider some of her principles for the greater good. Shim Eun-seok's case deals with school bullying, one of the most painful topics in society. This time, the defendants are several teenagers who are accused of brutally bullying their classmate, resulting in severe physical and psychological consequences for her. Sim, as always, approaches the case with strict determination, believing that such incidents must be punished in the most serious way to prevent their recurrence in the future. The victimized girl was not only physically assaulted, but also psychologically abused. A group of teenagers used her as a target for their ridicule, isolation, and constant humiliation. All these actions went on for a long time, and the school administration, as the investigation reveals, did not take any serious action despite complaints from the victim and her family. Sim immediately realizes that this case is more complicated than it may seem at first glance, as it involves not only the teenagers themselves, but also the adult side, the school teachers and management who allowed such actions to take place. The parents of the accused teenagers are actively defending their children in court. They claim that their children did not realize the gravity of their actions and that it was just a game. They try to reduce their children's actions to ordinary teenage pranks. Sim, however, does not accept such excuses. She is convinced that bullying is a serious crime and can have devastating lifelong consequences for the victim. Moreover, Sim is determined to prove that even teenagers should be held accountable for their actions if they knowingly harmed another person. During the court hearing, the victim, a classmate of the defendants, recounts what she went through. Her testimony is filled with pain. She was isolated, humiliated, and deprived of the opportunity to study in normal conditions due to constant bullying. The insults and physical attacks left a deep mark on both her body and psyche, which eventually led to hospitalization. The story touches everyone present, but Sim remains stern and resolute, seeing this case as an opportunity to show society that such crimes cannot go unpunished. Cha Tae-ju, on the other hand, takes a softer stance as before. He believes that teenagers who commit bullying deserve not only punishment but also the opportunity for rehabilitation. For him, the key point remains their age and the possibility of correction through special education and psychological support programs. He tries to convince Sim that punishment in this case will not always lead to a better outcome. For Cha, it is important that teenagers realize their mistakes and get a chance for correction, not just punishment. However, Sim, despite Che's arguments, remains adamant. She believes that the victim deserves justice and that bullying cannot be justified by age or ignorance. Sim believes that only through tough measures can such incidents be prevented from happening again. She questions the teenagers, finding out the details of their behavior and what drove them to such actions. During the questioning, it becomes clear that the teenagers were aware of the consequences of their actions, but did not consider them serious. This only strengthens Sim's determination to impose a harsh sentence. In addition, Judge Sim places great emphasis on the role of the school in the case. During the hearing, it is revealed that the school administration, including the teachers, knew what was going on but did nothing to protect the injured girl. Sim sees this as a serious omission on the part of the adults who should have intervened but chose to turn a blind eye to the bullying. She decides to use her influence to bring those who allowed this to happen to justice. Sim's final verdict implies harsh punishments for the main instigators of the bullying, whom she believes are the main culprits for what happened. She insists that they should receive the punishment they deserve, so that their actions will serve as a lesson to both themselves and society. The other participants, who did not play a key role, receive more lenient sentences with an emphasis on rehabilitation and assistance. An important part of the solution is to require the school to review its handling of such cases and to implement stricter monitoring of student behavior to prevent the recurrence of such situations. Cha Tae-ju, although he disagrees with the harshness of the verdict, recognizes that Sim's actions are aimed at restoring justice. He hopes that the court's decision will be a lesson to everyone involved and that the case will not only help to punish those responsible, but also to change the system so that such incidents do not happen again. Sim leaves the courtroom feeling that justice has been served. However, the question remains in her mind: is it possible to change social norms and behavior if the education system does not take active measures to protect students? Her inner doubts grow, but she stays true to her principles, believing that tough measures are the only way to change the situation. A new case that comes to Shim Eun-seok's desk involves the son of a powerful and wealthy businessman who is accused of a brutal crime. The case immediately attracts the attention of both the media and the general public as it raises important questions about the influence of power, wealth, and status on justice. Sim, known for her uncompromising stance toward all defendants regardless of their social status, faces a serious challenge when she sees money and privilege begin to interfere with the judicial process. A businessman's son, Lee Jae-hyun, is accused of an assault that left the victim with severe injuries. The details of the case are shocking. Jae-hyun, according to witnesses, violently attacked the young man during a conflict in a state of intense anger, and now his defense is trying to prove that the accused's actions were committed in a state of passion and cannot be considered intentional. Jae-hyun's father uses all his connections to mitigate the consequences for his son and begins to manipulate the trial, influencing witnesses, lawyers, and even school administrators in an attempt to portray his son in a more favorable light. Shim immediately sees how Lee Jae-hyun's family status is affecting the entire trial. The lawyers use all sorts of tricks to mitigate the punishment, emphasizing that this was an isolated incident, that the young man was under a lot of emotional pressure, and that he can reform. These attempts irritate Sim, who believes in equality before the law. For her, anyone who has committed a crime should be punished accordingly, no matter what family they come from. She sees the case not only as an attempt to stand up for justice, but also as a challenge to a system that sometimes gives privileged people more freedom and indulgence. Lee Jae-hyun's parents, especially his father, try to justify their son's actions, saying it was an accident caused by the stress of studying and societal pressures. The young man's father uses his connections to influential people to pressure the court to commute the sentence. He hires a team of top lawyers and tries to make his son look like a victim of circumstances rather than the culprit. Sim, however, is adamantly opposed to money and privilege influencing justice. She sees how wealthy families often try to use their position to avoid accountability, and for her, this case is a chance to show that the law should be equally strict for everyone. At the same time, Judge Cha Tae-ju, despite Shim's support in her quest for justice, begins to question whether Jae-hyun should be punished as severely as the other defendants. For him, it's important to consider not only the crime itself, but also the circumstances that may have influenced the young man's behavior. Cha believes that young criminals, even those from wealthy families, can be susceptible to pressures and stress that lead them to make mistakes. He is convinced that Jae-hyun, if given the opportunity, can reform himself and avoid repeating such behaviors in the future. Meanwhile, Lee Jae-hyun's lawyers continue to use various tricks to avoid a harsh sentence. They claim that the attack was provoked and insist that Jae-hyun acted in self-defense. They also try to whitewash his reputation by emphasizing his academic achievements and the high expectations society had for him, which they believe created the stressful situation that led to the conflict. However, Shim does not succumb to these arguments. She continues to insist that Jae-hyun should be held accountable for his actions, no matter how high his social standing is. Her determination proves that justice can't be bought with money or influence. Shim begins to scrutinize all the facts, demanding transparency and exposing the Lee family's attempts to influence the case. The final hearing of Lee Jae-hyun's case becomes the culmination of this intense struggle between power and justice. Shim delivers a verdict based on facts, not on the manipulations of the family and lawyers. She insists on a strict punishment for Jae-hyun to demonstrate to the public that the law makes no distinction between rich and poor. Her decision causes a strong reaction among her colleagues and the public alike. For many, the decision becomes a symbol that the justice system can resist attempts by powerful people to avoid taking responsibility for their actions. Cha Tae-ju, although he supports the idea of equality before the law, continues to wonder whether a balance between punishment and rehabilitation can be found in such cases. He's not sure that such a harsh sentence will help reform Jae-hyun, and believes that more emphasis should be placed not only on punishment, but also on opportunities for correction. Shim leaves the courtroom feeling satisfied that she's defended her belief that everyone is equal before the law. However, there are still doubts within her. Her inner struggle between justice and harshness of punishment continues to grow, and she must continue to search for answers to the question, how can justice be both fair and merciful? Shim Eun-seok is faced with a challenging new case involving a group of teenagers involved in adult criminal activity. This case touches deeply on the topic of exploitation of minors by adult criminals, manipulating and using children in illegal schemes. For Shim, this is not just another case, but an opportunity to expose to the public the problem of vulnerable teenagers being exploited in the criminal world. The teenage gang in question was involved in organized criminal activity under the direction of an adult criminal mastermind. The young people performed various tasks for the adult criminals, from transferring illegal goods to engaging in dangerous operations. They became tools in the hands of those who used their inexperience and vulnerability to achieve their goals. Their actions resulted in a series of incidents that attracted the attention of the police and led to the arrest of several members of the group. Shim, studying the case file, realizes that many of these teenagers grew up in difficult social conditions: poverty, lack of parental control and support, street life. These circumstances made them easy prey for criminal elements. However, for her, this does not absolve them of responsibility for their crimes. Shim decides that this case should be an example that participation in organized crime cannot be justified by harsh living conditions alone. The trial escalates when details of how the adult criminals manipulated the teenagers begin to surface. They took advantage of their naivete, promising them protection, money, and the family they never had. Judge Shim sees a deep problem with this. The teens weren't just committing crimes, they were drawn into a world where they were used as pawns, depriving them of the opportunity to realize the gravity of their actions. One of the key points in the case is whether the teens can be held fully responsible or whether the focus should be on punishing the adults who used them. Attorneys for some of the teens insist that their clients acted under duress and had no other choice while under pressure from their elders. The defense argues that the youths could not escape this cycle of violence because otherwise they were threatened with reprisals from adult criminals. Shim, despite her compassion for the plight of these teenagers, remains committed to her principles. She believes that even though the children have been used, they must still be held accountable for their actions. Her job is not only to pass judgment, but to try to figure out how to fix the system that allows incidents like this to happen. She decides that the key to this case will be the balance between punishment and rehabilitation. In parallel, Judge Cha Tae-ju continues to insist that the teens must be rehabilitated first. He believes that their involvement in criminal activities is the result of them seeing no other way out of their life situations. For Cha, it is important that the court not only punish the perpetrators, but also offer the teens programs that will help them turn their lives around and not return to the path of crime. During the hearings, details about how the teens were recruited by adult criminals come to light. Some of the teens candidly reveal that they didn't know how to get out of the situation and that they were afraid of the consequences if they disobeyed their mentors. These revelations cause Shim to question whether they should be punished as severely as the adults. Her internal conflict between harshness and compassion intensifies when she realizes that many of these teens were victims of a system that failed to protect them. Shim's final sentence includes strict penalties for those who played key roles in the crimes, but she also offers rehabilitation programs for those who were drawn into criminal activity by adult pressure. She insists that the system should be tough on organized crime, but should not deny young people a chance to reform themselves. Shim also suggests that adult criminals who have manipulated teenagers should be investigated. She sees this case as an example of how important it is to protect young people from criminal influences and insists that such situations should be monitored more strongly to prevent them in the future. Cha Tae-ju supports Shim's decision, seeing that she has found a balance between punishment and the possibility of rehabilitation. However, he also continues to express his fears that many of these teens may end up back on the criminal path if society does not offer them alternatives. Sim leaves the courtroom realizing that she has to continue to fight a system that allows children to be used in criminal activity. She realizes that every sentence must take into account not only guilt but also the possibility of correction, especially when it comes to juveniles. The case that Shim Eun-seok faces is about a school violence that escalated into a dangerous situation that resulted in serious consequences for several students. She takes on a case involving a fight among teenagers that took place on school grounds, and one of the victims was seriously injured. This time, the case before the court is not only about punishment, but also about how such incidents can be prevented in the future, as well as understanding what measures should be taken to protect teenagers from such situations. At the center of this case is a group of teens involved in a serious fight. One of the participants, a student with a difficult family situation, seriously injured another student. As a result, the victim ended up in the hospital with multiple injuries, and his family is demanding justice. The parents blame not only the teenager involved in the attack, but also the school, which failed to properly supervise its students. The question of how much the school system is responsible for the incident becomes central to the trial. Shim Eun-seok, examining the case file, sees that the teenager's aggression could have been caused by his personal problems and environmental pressures. The teenager who committed the attack had gotten into trouble many times before, and his behavior had caused concern among teachers and classmates. However, no action had been taken to help him. This leads Sim to reflect on the extent to which the upbringing and education system can influence teenage behavior, and what needs to be done to prevent similar incidents in the future. During the trial, it becomes clear that the school and teachers were aware of the problems with the teenager but did not intervene properly. Sim calls in school officials to get to the bottom of how this could have happened and why no one took action to prevent violence. The interrogations uncover shortcomings in the system of control and prevention of such cases in educational institutions. Sim sees that one of the reasons for the tragedy was the lack of attention to the problems of teenagers by the school and family. While Sim actively fights for justice, Judge Cha Tae-ju again takes a softer stance. He believes that the teens involved in the conflict deserve not only punishment but also rehabilitation. He points out that school fights and violence are often the result of psychological and social problems, and that teenagers should be put on the path of correction through special programs and the help of specialists. For him, it is important that the accused teenager, who was already in a difficult life situation, does not lose the chance for correction. However, Sim remains firm in her belief that violence cannot be justified and that serious crimes must be held accountable, regardless of the circumstances. She insists that the system must be tough on such actions so that it becomes a lesson to other students and prevents further incidents. Her stance is the need for strict punishment for violence to show that such actions are not tolerated in the school environment. In parallel with this trial, Sim is initiating an investigation into the school and the educational system. She insists that the school is responsible for the well-being of the students and must take active measures to prevent violence among adolescents. It is important to her that educational institutions take a more active role in preventing conflict and supporting those students who may be in vulnerable situations. Sim's final judgment includes strict penalties for the main defendant who seriously injured another teenager. However, she is also pushing for the school system to overhaul the way it deals with troubled students. Sim is demanding the implementation of prevention programs in schools that will focus on violence prevention and early intervention in difficult situations. She sees this case not only as a lawsuit but as an opportunity to change the system for the better so that tragedies like this don't happen again. Cha Tae-ju agrees with Shim's decision, seeing it as a desire for justice and responsibility. However, he continues to insist that adolescents need more attention and help to keep them out of such situations. It is important to him that the juvenile justice system takes into account not only punishment but also the possibility of correction. Sim leaves the courtroom realizing that her sentence was fair, but realizing that the case opened up many questions about how schools should operate and how to prevent these situations. Her internal conflict between harsh punishment and the possibility of rehabilitation continues to intensify, and she realizes that there is still a lot of work to be done to change the system. The focus of Shim Eun-seok's next case turns out to be the leak of exam materials at a prestigious school. The incident has caused widespread public outcry as it deals not only with theft, but also with the deep issues surrounding the pressure on students in academia. This series exposes not only the leakage case itself, but also the systemic problems that drive teenagers to go to extreme measures for success. The main defendant in the case is a student from a wealthy and influential family who organized the leak of exam questions and sold them to his classmates. The case has caught the attention of the media and the public because it touches not only on the actions of one teenager, but also on broader issues of corruption, pressure in the educational system, and how status and money can affect the outcome of a trial. Shim, as he immerses himself in the investigation, sees that the teenager was not just acting out of self-interest. He was under tremendous pressure from his family, who expected only the highest achievements from him. His parents, especially his father, had always demanded that he get excellent grades and get into a prestigious university. This pressure became so strong that the teenager saw cheating as the only way out of the situation. His actions were dictated by the fear of not living up to expectations, and he went to extreme measures to avoid condemnation from his family. The teenager's parents try to justify his actions by saying that the education system is too cruel to children, and that they were forced to look for any means to ensure their son's success. They are convinced that their child did not mean to hurt anyone, and that his act was caused by stress and pressure. Shim, however, does not accept such excuses. It is clear to her that the teenager knowingly went on a crime and his status should not affect the outcome of the case. The trial escalates when facts begin to surface that the school had an atmosphere that encouraged corruption and fraud. Shim asks school officials tough questions about how they could have allowed such a leak and why no one took the proper steps to control it. It turns out that some staff members knew about what was going on, but turned a blind eye to avoid damaging the school's reputation. Cha Tae-ju, who again advocates the rehabilitation of teenagers, insists that the accused should be given a chance to reform, not just punished. He believes that the education system itself provokes such cases by creating unbearable pressure on students. Che sees the case as a problem that goes beyond a single crime and believes that teenagers should receive more support, not just face the threat of punishment. Shim, however, maintains her tough stance. She believes that crime should be held accountable regardless of the circumstances. It is important for her to show that no excuses can be used as a reason to break the law. Shim believes that the punishment should be fair, and that such cases can be repeated if there is no strict approach. Her position is met with mixed reactions from her colleagues, as many of them believe that the accused should have been sent for correction rather than just punished. As the trial continues, Shim faces internal doubts. She sees how the education system and parental pressure can influence teenagers to seek illegal ways to succeed. Her own beliefs begin to collide with reality, and she realizes that punishment is only part of the solution. She needs to find a balance between justice and the possibility of rehabilitation for these young people. Shim's final solution includes strict punishments for the main accused, who played a key role in the exam leak. However, she also insists that the education system must be overhauled and support programs for high-pressure students must be introduced. She demands that the school and family review their approaches to education and training to avoid a repeat of such incidents in the future. Cha Tae-ju, though not fully agreeing with the harsh verdict, supports the idea that changes in the education system are necessary. He hopes that the court's decision will serve as a lesson not only for the defendant, but also for the entire system, which should care about the mental health and well-being of students. Shim leaves the courtroom feeling that she has stood up for justice, but inwardly realizes that she still has a lot to do to prevent similar cases from happening again in the future. Her thoughts about how the system needs to change begin to influence her decisions more and more. Shim Eun-seok's new case involves a tragic accident caused by an underage driver. The case raises serious questions about the responsibility of not only the teenager but also his parents, who were clearly negligent in allowing their son to drive the car. What happened forces the court to assess the teenager's degree of guilt and to find out to what extent the parents can be held responsible for what happened. The accident occurred when a teenager named Kang Min-soo, without a driver's license, took his parents' car and went to meet friends. Lacking sufficient driving experience and control over the situation, he failed to control the car at high speed, resulting in a serious accident. Several people were injured in the collision, with one passenger sustaining injuries incompatible with life. The case immediately garnered public and media attention as it raised questions about why the minor was behind the wheel and how the parents allowed it to happen. The trial begins with a detailed analysis of what led to the tragedy. Shim examines the circumstances under which the teen was able to gain access to the car and finds serious lapses in his parents' behavior. It turns out that they were aware that their son had previously gotten behind the wheel, and while they realized it was unsafe, they didn't take the proper steps to prevent something like this from happening. Min-soo's father, being busy at work, thought his son was responsible enough to just practice a little while his mother turned a blind eye to these violations, not wanting to engage in conflict. Shim sees this case as a blatant example of irresponsible parental behavior that actually contributed to the tragedy that occurred. In the course of the proceedings, she wonders how much of the responsibility for what happened should lie with the teenager himself and how much with his negligent parents. Shim believes that parents are just as responsible for their children's actions and insists that the justice system should take these circumstances into account when sentencing them. Cha Tae-ju, on the other hand, is in favor of leniency for the teenager, as always. He believes that Min-soo was in a difficult situation in which adults did not provide him with proper guidance, and that punishment should be aimed at correction, not just condemnation. Cha is convinced that the teen did not act with the intent to harm anyone, and that his act was more the result of inexperience and lack of adult supervision. Meanwhile, defense attorneys insist that the mere fact that the teen took the car without permission shows that he acted on his own without his parents' knowledge. They argue that Min-soo should be held fully responsible for his actions. However, Sim, examining the case file, sees that the parents were aware of their son's previous violations but failed to take any measures to prevent similar behavior in the future. Moreover, the teen's father even allowed him to practice driving on several occasions, despite the fact that his son did not have official permission to do so. During the hearing, Sim also interrogates Min-soo's friends who were in the car with him at the time of the accident. Their testimony helps reveal that the teen often borrowed his parents' car, and it was a sort of demonstration of independence and status among his peers. This information only strengthens Sim's conviction that the parents failed in their duty to supervise their son. Sim's final sentence takes into account both the teen's own guilt and the parents' significant responsibility for what happened. Min-soo receives punishment for breaking the law and endangering others, but Sim also draws attention to the need for family therapy and parental involvement in educational programs. She believes that such cases should be a lesson not only for teenagers, but also for adults, who often ignore their influence on their children's behavior. Sim also demands that the parents be punished for their negligence, as their inaction directly led to the tragedy. She insists that cases like this should make parents think about their role in their children's lives and what consequences their decisions may have. Sim uses this case as an opportunity to emphasize the importance of parental responsibility and the need to intervene earlier to prevent tragedies. Cha Tae-ju, though he supports Sim's decision, continues to insist that cases like this show that the system needs to focus more on prevention and rehabilitation. He believes that if Min-soo's parents had gotten timely help, this tragedy could have been prevented. Sim leaves the courtroom with the conviction that the verdict is fair, but realizes that tragedies like this will happen again unless parents start taking more responsibility in raising their children. She realizes that this case is just one manifestation of a problem that needs to be addressed at a systemic level. Shim Eun-seok is faced with a very sensitive case where minors are accused of unacceptable behavior towards each other. The case raises questions about consent, social pressure, and how the legal system should handle such situations where both the accused and the victim are teenagers. At the trial, Seo Ji-yeon, the victim, reveals that she was subjected to unwanted actions by her classmate, Hong Soo-ho, at a school party. She emphasizes that she could not refuse because she felt pressured by her friends and did not want to be rejected or ridiculed. It is clear in her account that her choice was limited not only by the situation but also by her fear of being misunderstood among her peers. This testimony raises an important question about the extent to which social pressures among adolescents can influence their actions and decisions. Soo-ho, for his part, argues that his actions were not motivated by malice, and he was sure that everything was happening with the consent of both parties. To him, the situation seemed normal and he saw no indication that Ji-yeon felt uncomfortable or opposed to what was happening. This point emphasizes the difficulty of understanding consent among adolescents, especially in the face of social pressures. The court hearings begin to shed light on another issue: peer influence. Soo-ho's friends who were at the party confirm that there were jokes and taunts during the party, and that Soo-ho may have felt compelled to act to maintain his status among his peers. However, Sim sees a larger problem behind this: the lack of knowledge and understanding teenagers have about personal boundaries and consent. She wonders how society and schools can prevent such cases through better education. Judge Cha Tae-ju, as in other cases, favors a more lenient approach to punishment. He believes that Soo-ho himself was a victim of misperception due to his environment and lack of knowledge. He suggests a rehabilitation program that will help the teenager realize the consequences of his actions and teach him to respect the personal boundaries of others. For Cha, it is important that such cases not only end in punishment, but also give teens a chance to mend their ways through education and understanding of their mistakes. Sim, despite understanding Cha's position, insists that clear boundaries must be set. She sees this case not just as a conflict between two teenagers, but as an important lesson for the entire system. Teenagers must realize that even in the face of social pressure, they must take responsibility for their actions. Sim emphasizes that rehabilitation is important, but it must go hand in hand with responsibility. Sim's final decision becomes a compromise between punishment and rehabilitation. She assigns Soo-ho mandatory participation in a program to teach personal boundaries and consent issues, so he can understand how his actions have affected the other person. Psychological support programs are assigned for Ji-yeon to help her cope with the situation and regain her self-confidence. In addition, Sim uses the case as an opportunity to call for changes in the educational system. She proposes that schools introduce mandatory programs on personal boundaries, consent, and relationships so that teens can better understand how to build healthy relationships and respect each other. She believes that such programs can prevent similar situations from happening again in the future. Cha Tae-ju agrees with Sim's decision, seeing it as an opportunity to not only punish but also help young people learn from their mistakes. He continues to insist that such cases should focus more on educating teens so that they can better understand their actions and avoid repeating similar mistakes. Sim leaves the courtroom feeling that this case was particularly difficult because of its emotional and social component. She realizes that she still has a lot of work ahead of her to improve the education and justice system to protect teens and help them grow up realizing their responsibility for their actions. The final episode of the season confronts Shim Eun-seok with a case that deeply affects her personal history. The trial she is facing reawakens old traumas and forces her to reevaluate her principles and attitudes that she has demonstrated throughout the season. The case becomes a sort of mirror of her own past, forcing her to delve into her memories and confront the painful events that have shaped her as a judge. The case begins with the arrest of a teenager on charges of acting aggressively toward another minor. The case instantly resonates with the community as it reminds them of the injustices often present in the juvenile justice system. Sim, as she takes on the investigation, begins to feel an inexplicable connection to the case. The deeper she delves into its details, the more she realizes that certain aspects of the case resonate with her own past, which she has long tried to forget. The teenager being accused is like himself from years ago, a child from a dysfunctional family who is constantly surrounded by abuse and neglect. His story of how society and the system failed him echoes from Sim's past. The boy was abandoned by his parents, grew up in an environment where no one protected him, and eventually found himself drawn into the underworld. Remembering his own struggle to survive, Sim can't help but empathize with this teenager, seeing him as a reflection of his younger self. This emotional connection causes internal conflict for Sim. Her entire career and beliefs have been built on a strict approach to justice and a rejection of sentimentality. But now she is faced with a situation where rational thinking gives way to personal experience. She begins to question whether the justice system is fair for teenagers like this boy, and whether it is doing enough to help those on the edge. Sim's past is gradually revealed during the court proceedings through flashbacks and her inner reflections. As a child, she too was abandoned by her parents and grew up in an atmosphere of indifference. The only way for her to survive was to persevere and strive for justice, which led her to a career as a judge. However, the trauma she suffered as a child affected her character and made her so tough. Now, faced with a teenager whose life is following the same path, Sim begins to question the rightness of her methods. At the same time, she sees that the juvenile justice system is far from perfect. With each new case, especially this one, Sim realizes more and more that strict sentences don't always solve the problem. Often the system simply punishes teens without offering them a real chance at correction and rehabilitation. She begins to realize that many of those who end up in court simply have no choice but to commit crimes because their lives have been filled with suffering and injustice. This leads her to an important question: how much does the system she works in really help such people? Judge Cha Tae-ju, seeing how hard Shim is dealing with this case, supports her and shares that everyone deserves a second chance. For him, rehabilitation is not just an opportunity to change teenagers, but a way to change society itself, giving young people a chance to reform and integrate. He suggests that Sim look at the case from a different perspective, not as a simple sentencing job, but as an opportunity to help a teenager who is in a difficult situation. Sim conducts a series of interrogations where shocking details of the accused teenager's life come to light. His story reminds Sim of what she herself has been through. He tells how he has been on his own since childhood, and that no one has ever supported him. The accused teenager's life was much more complicated than Sim could have imagined. He tells how he was left to fend for himself from childhood, growing up in a dysfunctional family where his parents were either preoccupied with their own problems or simply ignored him. The school, which could have been a safe haven for him, also failed to protect him. Teachers either did not notice him or wrote off his behavior as bad upbringing. As a result, the boy, devoid of support, found himself in a world where aggression and crime became his only way to survive. These revelations evoke memories of Sim's own childhood. She recalls how, as a child, she too felt abandoned and unwanted, and how she had to become strong to cope with pain and injustice. These memories make her think about how many teens who end up in court are not always at fault for their own actions. They are victims of circumstance, and the justice system must take this factor into account. Cha Tae-ju, observing Shim's internal struggle, suggests that she reconsider her approach to the case. He insists that this teen deserves a chance at rehabilitation, not just a harsh punishment. He urges Sim that she sees this case as an opportunity to right the wrongs of a system that once failed to help her herself. For Cha, it is important that the justice system give teenagers not only punishment but also a chance to reform themselves and start their lives with a clean slate. Sim's internal conflict intensifies as the hearing continues. She sees how the social system, the school, and even the parents have failed this teenager by leaving him alone with his problems. Her firm beliefs in strict punishment begin to crack. She realizes that this incident doesn't just remind her of her past, but makes her rethink her entire career. Flashbacks show how Sim faced similar problems as a child. Her own parents did not take proper care of her, the school did not notice her suffering, and she herself felt helpless and vulnerable. This case becomes an opportunity for her to re-examine her beliefs, to realize that the system in which she works needs to change to prevent such tragedies, not just punish them. The closer the case comes to an end, the more Sim realizes that she has a choice to make: follow her principles and pass a strict sentence, or give the teenager a second chance and set him on the path to rehabilitation. She begins to realize that each case is not just a punishment for mistakes, but an opportunity to help someone turn their life around. At the climax of the trial, Sim takes a step unexpected by many. She decides not to resort to harsh punishment, but instead offers the teenager a rehabilitation program that will focus on his psychological help, socialization support, and learning how to cope. This decision becomes a symbol of her personal victory over the past and her desire to change the juvenile justice system for the better. Sim is also using this case as an opportunity to advocate for reforms in the juvenile justice system. She is calling for the state and society to invest more in supporting troubled teens instead of just punishing them. Sim believes that through education, psychological support, and rehabilitation, similar tragedies can be prevented from happening again. The series finale shows Sim gaining a new perspective on her job. She realizes that the justice system she has long worked in is far from ideal, and that she has a long way to go to make it fairer. But she also realizes that her own experiences and pain from her past have made her strong and capable of changing the future for other teens. Her inner world finally finds peace as Sim accepts her past, realizing that it has made her who she is. She decides to continue to fight for justice. But now her approach becomes more flexible, based on a desire to help those in need, not just punish mistakes. This final episode shows the conclusion of her personal arc and gives hope for a future where the juvenile justice system can become fairer and more supportive.